So now that we're done with the main envelope and the slabs, balustrades and all that, we can move on to the more exciting part of this tutorial, which is doing the more organic style modeling. In particular, this video is going to be about doing the central support structure for the stadium, and then in later videos we're going to get onto the organically shaped stadium and seating at the top here. So to start off, let's just go and create a new layer to work on. And we're going to call this one 04 Stadium Support. And what we're going to do is we're going to select the plan and the elevation to work with, and we're going to isolate those. Essentially what the structure is, it's a set of 4 columns that is surrounding this building in the middle, and those columns are going to taper and get slightly bigger towards the top so that they can carry the load of the stadium, and then they're going to have these steel webs that connect them in the middle here, just for more support to strengthen the structure. So to get going, we're going to look in our plan view, and we know that those columns, it's not really shown on the plan, but let's just say for our sake that the architects would have shown us this elevation and given us a sort of verbal explanation like I'm giving you now, that what we want is 4 columns sitting on either side of this building, and they're going to have the webs connecting them in between each of those columns. So to get started, we're going to start by making a box on this side, and we extrude that upwards. That box, let's say we want to make it 4.5 by 4.5 meters, and the height will be around 155 meters, since I know that's more or less the height of our tower support. So in terms of the positioning, we know that we can come back into plan and position it later. Let's look in our front view. Let's zoom in here, and we can see that we can more or less leave it where it is. We can perhaps make it a little bit thinner. So let's just drop this down to 4 meters. And drop this down to 4 meters as well. And from this point on, we can now go and convert it to an editable poly. We can bring these slightly down since they don't need to be so high. And by selecting the edges, we can right-click, connect, and just drag these edges up to about there. Do the same procedure, connect, and then what we will do at the top here is we'll select all the vertices, and we'll just, by pressing R, scale, and we're doing the scale, a 3-dimensional scale, so in perspective we are basically scaling like this. We're tapering everything out. We're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to keep looking in the front elevation so that I can get the main scale to look correct. And once that is done, I'm going to connect again. And here I'm going to drag these lines roughly to the middle of these connecting webs that we have here. I'm going to do the same thing here. Right click and connect. Drag that down, just visually placing it in the right place. And the same thing here for the last time. Great. So now we can take each of these connected edges and we can use the chamfer tool just to make them slightly larger. They're going to be roughly 7 meters. And we can then go back. Let's look in perspective view. So we now have a column which is sitting on the corner of the building, and it's going to have an area here which will be connected, an area there, and similarly an area here. I'm assuming that the way we chamfered it, that there will be perhaps two sets of vertices here. So if we select this area, we see that there are 8 vertices selected. So we know that we have to weld them back together. Let's just scroll up and down till we find our weld. And now we have 4 less, just so that we are actually looking at the correct thing. Now we can delete these polygons at the top and the bottom since we don't need them. And before we start meshing, or at least merging these 2 sides with each other, let's go and create a copy, or at least a copy of each of these columns on the four corners. So we'll go back to our working pivot that we set up in the previous video, and we will create copies of each of those, just using the copy tool. So now we have the four columns, and we're going to now merge them all together. We're going to attach them all with each other, and in the next part we're going to create these merged sections here. So to do that, we're going to select the inner faces, and we're going to click on Bridge. And we're going to repeat that. I'm going to pause it here since I need to do this to each of the three on all four sides. So just to make the video go quicker, I'll pause it for a few minutes, and then we'll come back to this point once I've completed that small step. So here we are, all of them have been bridged together from all four sides, 3 levels up. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select the edges and just select all of the edges down the front and all of the edges down the side. And what we need to do is we need to basically pull these middles down towards each other so that it gets slightly narrower, so it tapers in the middle. So that's what we're doing now. We've selected the edges, and we're just going to right click and press connect. We just want to connect it once, so we click yes on that. And in the next step, let's select just the vertices. Let's just select one of the 4 sets, or the 4 sides to one of the 3 sets, sorry. And once we have that selected, let's just go out of our working pivot here, back to our standard mode. And we're just going to scale this down by eye using the scale tool. And we're going to do the same thing here. Just going to scale that down. If you want to have the scaling correct, you can look at the percentage that you're scaling on the bottom of the screen here. So for example, as I'm scaling, I can see that it's 36, 35, 34, 33. We can see that happening over here. So I'm just doing this by eye just to make it go quickly. And once we're at this point, we're pretty much ready to test out what our NURMS could look like. So we're going to try the NURMS toggle, and immediately we see the form starting to take shape. Now we're going to scroll down here, and we're going to add 2 more iterations so that we're on 3 instead of 1. And we can see that now we have this outer form starting to take its final shape. So if we look at the elevation, we can look at what we have, and we can look at the CAD plans, and then we can decide whether you need to edit it or not. So for instance, you can take these and you can stretch it up or down until you feel comfortable that it looks more or less like the CAD plans. Again, this is roughly a conceptual organic development process, so we're not too worried about getting the curvature or the sizing to be too precise. We just want to get the main message across. Maybe these could have all been slightly tighter together, so we can also just scale down both to make that a little bit more narrow. Pull these a little bit higher. And as I'm doing this, I'm working on all 4 columns at the same time, just in one go. Maybe this can be slightly wider. Great, so I think that's enough for now. We've created the shape in the middle, and this will be our support structure that we're going to build the entire stadium onto. If we exit out, we can have a look at how that's interacting with our building, and we can see that our slabs are all cutting into it, so therefore being supported by it. And this still right now is quite a conceptual shape. In reality, it could be simple steel struts and sections cutting across, but we want to keep this model quite contemporary, quite new age. One more thing just before we finish is we're just going to recap. Basically, in this video, we've made the one object, and we've gone through the process of how to start with a simple polygon, simple poly object, and how we applied the NURMS toggle through the right click. And then we learnt about the difference between setting up a shape up using this object that we added the gnomes to versus creating a more complex shape out of many points or vertices or polys straight from the word Go. So the important thing here to remember is to have this simple shape to work with, because it can happen quite easily that the people come back to you and say, well, we now want a rigid structure, and for example they want to now create steel sections out of each of these lines. So what you would do in that case is you could say, okay, fine, I undo my gnomes and I'm now going to add a lattice to this. So press LAT, press enter, and now we have a lattice shape happening. We can change that radius up to, let's say, 0.2 to make it quite thick, and we see now that we have sort of a steel lattice form coming up, and this is all just in a couple of clicks, and you can show different conceptual examples using this method without really going through the trouble of remodeling things 20 times. So this way we can have quite rapid turnaround times for different options. Right there, we went from something very organic to something very structural and engineer-like. So that is it for this video. We learned all about making gnomes shapes. In the next one, we will start creating the form for the stadium at the top. So hooray for that.